Good morning, I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers.
Right now on Morning News Now, sharpening the message. A pointed new warning to Russia from the White House. The president now vowing to target a critical Russian gas pipeline if they invade Ukraine.
We will impose the most severe sanctions that have ever been imposed. And there'll be a lot to pay for that down the road.
We've got team coverage this morning across the region. Also this morning, All Is Fair, a tale of modern love and deceit on a popular dating app. The new Netflix documentary called Tinder Swindler, a wealthy con man allegedly shaking down women for thousands of dollars. Now those women are looking to swipe back. And Oscar nominations. After another pandemic movie season, Academy Award nominations are out this morning in a pool filled with worthy contenders. Who gets the glory and who gets snubbed? Excited to see who's going to get nominated. We know it'll be 10 Best Pictures nominees this year. That's a new rule change. It has to be 10 pictures up for Best Picture.
Has to be 10.
Yes.
No, that's a lot.
I know, it is.
I bet I've seen none of them.
No, me either, I think, this year. All right. We're going to begin with that warning from President Biden if Russia invades Ukraine.
Yeah, with U.S. officials signaling that Russia could invade any day now, the president is now threatening to put an end to a critical Russian pipeline that runs through Ukraine.
If Russia invades, that means tanks or troops crossing the border of Ukraine again. Then there will be no longer a Nord Stream 2. We will bring an end to it.
Now, as tensions grow from Washington to Moscow, two leaders at the center of this crisis, Russian President Putin and Ukrainian President Zelensky, met separately with France's president. It's part of a series of critical talks already underway this week. NBC News correspondent Aaron McLaughlin is in Kyiv, Ukraine, and NBC News reporter Matt Bodner is in Moscow. Good morning to the both of you. Thanks for being with us. Aaron, I will begin with you. So French President Emmanuel Macron is meeting with Ukraine's president. Now, this is just a day after speaking with Putin, meeting with him in the Kremlin. What do we know about these talks?
Well, the talks are still happening, and prior to that meeting today, Ukrainians very clearly laying out their red line, saying that they will not sacrifice their territorial integrity. They want to make their own foreign policy decisions. They also want their own sovereignty to be maintained, which includes the option to join NATO, which essentially is the Kremlin's red line. And analysts that I've been speaking to here in Kyiv believe that the Kremlin wants much more than that. They believe that the Kremlin wants an outsized influence in what happens in Ukraine and the Ukrainian decision making. And there's a deep suspicion here in Kyiv that the West could try to push Ukraine to make some key concessions on some of those areas, which would be deeply popular here in Kyiv and politically costly to Zelensky. So that is sort of the backdrop in which this meeting is taking place. The two leaders are expected to have a press conference shortly, and all eyes will be on the tone and the messaging during that press conference.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Matt, let's talk about the meeting yesterday. So Macron with Putin. Macron called for de-escalation. But how did that meeting go from Russia's side? I mean, are they willing to move forward with any de-escalation of troops at the Ukrainian border? Something we've been wondering for weeks at this point.
Thank you, Savannah. Well, we're definitely seeing mixed messages from the Kremlin this morning. On the one hand, they speak very positively about Macron and his efforts to sustain a dialogue. But when you kind of get down to the details, for example, at today's daily Kremlin press briefing with the spokesman Dmitry Peskov, there's a lot to still be concerned about. They actually straight up denied some of these claims that we're seeing from the French side that some kind of understanding or agreement was made, with the Kremlin spokesman saying directly that Moscow and Paris can't come to any kind of agreement because France is part of NATO and Paris is not in charge of NATO. The implication there being the United States is in charge of NATO. That's who Russia needs to deal with. At the same time, we continue to see more troops move towards the border. Actually, the first of 6 Russian landing ships entered the Black Sea this morning. So no sign yet they're backing down.
Thanks, Matt. Now, Aaron, President Biden says if Russia invades Ukraine, that he's going to bring an end to this critical Russian pipeline that runs through Ukraine, as we mentioned just a few minutes ago. Walk us through what the impact of this move would be for Ukraine, but also the rest of Europe.
Yeah, that is a pipeline that would deliver natural gas directly to Germany. Nord Stream 2 has not been activated. And according to President Biden, it certainly is on the table in all of this. Ukraine opposes the pipeline because it doesn't actually run through Ukraine. It delivers the gas to Germany, and Ukraine would miss out on about $1 billion in transit fees if that pipeline were to be activated. But more than that, it also gives Russia, in the eyes of Kyiv and other analysts familiar with the situation, an outsized influence on European politics, European decision-making. Already, Russia supplies the continent with 40% of its natural gas. This is a fact not lost on EU officials. Take a listen.
Energy issues are central to this crisis because Russia doesn't hesitate to use the significant energy supplies to Europe as a leverage for geopolitical gains. 140,000 troops massed in the border is not to go to have tea.
It is worth noting that when asked in that press conference yesterday, the German chancellor refused to corroborate what President Biden was saying, which is that in the event of a Russian invasion, the Nord Stream 2 project would be put to an end.
And Matt, quickly before I let you both go, I just want your take on what we just heard. They're using this as leverage. Just how much of a political tool is Russia's gas supply?
Well, they'll never actually straight up admit it, but it's obvious that they're counting on this to be a major kind of sticking point for Europe. And really, it's no accident that when we saw Putin finally lean into this crisis last week at that press conference with Viktor Orban from Hungary, that he began his remarks by announcing a major gas deal at below market price. So it's all about the implication there. We've also heard from some of the more hawkish corners of Moscow that Moscow should just be threatening to cut off the gas if it's sanctioned in any way. So it's a clear factor in all of this.
All right, Matt and Aaron, thanks for kicking us off this hour with this important news.
Now to a fierce debate over mask mandates for school kids. At least 4 states have decided to drop their mandates as COVID cases continue to drop across the country. Connecticut, Delaware, New Jersey, and Oregon, all blue states, will no longer require students to wear masks in the classroom on a state level. But states like New Jersey are leaving the decision to reinstate mandates to individual schools. Governor Gavin Newsom is also adjusting mask mandates in California. Masks will no longer be required indoors for vaccinated people starting next week, but students will still be required to wear masks in the classroom there. These policy changes come as more politicians grapple with the future of COVID in the U.S. and the demands of their pandemic-weary constituents. Let's bring in Dr. Ebony Jade Hilton for more on this. She's a professor of anesthesiology and critical care medicine. She's also the co-founder and medical director of Good Stock Consulting. Doctor, good to see you. I have a feeling you're probably not thrilled to see these mask mandates dropping in places around the country. The bottom line is it looks like it's happening in more and more places. So what's your advice to parents who are worried? What are the best ways they can protect their kids while they're in school?
Right. You know, it feels like Groundhog Day, where we did the same thing back in June of 2021 and said everyone who was vaccinated can remove their mask, and then Delta hit. What I say again is that we are too early into this pandemic when we still currently have 2,600 people dying a day. That's 1 American per 33 seconds. And our kids are getting infected at alarming numbers. In the last 2 weeks, 1.4 million children were diagnosed with COVID-19. That's 12 million children over the course of this pandemic. And so this is not the time to say, let's remove these masks when we're seeing that COVID is not done with us. And particularly because we know that our smallest children are still not able to be vaccinated. So when their siblings go to school, they end up bringing that COVID-19 back home.
That being said, if masks are required in your or not required in your kid's school, you're worried about it. What is the best advice for your kid to try and protect them as much as possible?
Right. It's one of those things, although masks are not mandated, does not mean a parent cannot put their child in a mask. Also, parents demand, just like parents are going to throw these tantrums at school boards to say no mask, go and demand for those school boards to tell them what is the ventilation system within those school classrooms, right? What is the entitled CO2? What is the carbon dioxide level within those classrooms? What's the ventilation system? When's the last time it was been updated? And how are they ensuring that those protocols as far as social distancing and mitigating the spread, how are they also being addressed? Those are things that you can get objective findings for and use that to guide your whether or not you're going to take your child to school with a mask and or insist on virtual learning.
Let's switch gears a little bit, talk about a new study coming out of Israel suggesting people with an insufficient amount of vitamin D are at risk for severe COVID illness. So what does this tell us about our natural immunity? Should we be taking more vitamin D supplements?
Right. You know, vitamin D is always in vogue and out of vogue, where we talk about vitamin D because it is absolutely important. But what we know is that that's not necessarily a causation, but maybe a correlation, meaning that just because you have high levels of vitamin D does not mean that you cannot get severe COVID, right? And just because you have low levels of vitamin D does not mean that you won't get or you will get severe COVID. So it's one of those things to keep in mind. And of course, we encourage everyone to eat a healthy diet, green leafy vegetables and fruits. And we encourage you to be outside as much as possible, but also to get vaccinated because that reduces your chance of hospitalization by 90% with Omicron.
Dr. Ebony Jade Hilton, as always, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it. And our doctors are always ready to answer your questions. You can email us at morningnewsnow@nbcuni.com with your questions for them. And you can also let us know if you want to stay anonymous. Let's get a check on your morning news now weather.
Which means it's time for Bill Cairns to join us. Hey, Bill.
Hey, good morning once again. And we have a very unusual weather pattern setting up in Southern California. It just so happens there's a big event coming up. We got the Super Bowl coming up in Los Angeles by the time we get to Sunday. So I'm going to start with today's forecast just to kind of set the scene. There's not a lot of troublesome weather out there across the country. A little bit of snow in Maine, a little bit of rain in Florida. But you notice a lot of the country is pretty good. Then you look at Los Angeles. 80 degrees today. One of the warmest spots in the entire country will be right in L.A. Now, as far as the week goes, and this is what's very unusual, they've actually issued a heat watch in the beginning of February in Southern California, covering Los Angeles to Long Beach, even the Malibu area, too. And they're actually telling people, especially people that aren't used to the heat, coming from other areas, vacationing or coming to the Super Bowl, just to be prepared for the excessive heat that your body may not be used to it. I mean, we're going to set potentially some record highs in the area. So for Wednesday, Los Angeles is record highs 89. We should be around 87. So we'll be close on Wednesday. But this isn't a one-day event. This is going to continue into Thursday, even into the weekend. Los Angeles on Thursday should break their record high. And it's not just L.A. San Francisco could break their record high. Redding could break your record high. We haven't had hardly any rain or snow in California in about a month. So conditions are still very dry. So the fire danger is going to be high in February. And right through the weekend, L.A., 88 Friday, Saturday, 87, Super Bowl Sunday, 87 degrees. This could potentially be one of the warmest Super Bowls we've ever had.
Wow.
So, yeah, interesting to say the least.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Different from a game at Lambeau Field in the middle of January, definitely.
Right.
Yes. Thank you, Bill.
Thanks, Bill. Coming up, the battle over ballot drop boxes is heating up in one battleground state.
Why a pandemic election staple could be no more by the time midterms roll around. We're going to take you county to county next. Welcome back. With the midterms now coming into view, the battle over election rules is heating up in many parts of the country. As part of our County to County series this morning, we want to focus on one particular point of controversy: ballot drop boxes.
During the pandemic, millions of Americans chose to vote through absentee ballots. In the 2020 election, 40 states and the District of Columbia allowed voters to drop those absentee ballots in those drop boxes instead of mailing them. Now, conservatives, led by former President Trump, are taking aim at the practice, launching challenges in state legislatures and the courts.
NBC News correspondent Shaquille Brewster joins us now from Milwaukee, where the state Supreme Court is expected to rule on whether to allow drop boxes ahead of the midterms this fall. Shaq, good morning. So Wisconsin has become one of the key battlegrounds on the electoral map. It's no surprise its election rules are coming under close scrutiny. Walk us through the court battle going on there over drop boxes.
And to do that, you really have to start back at 2020. It was in 2020 when you had election officials here in Wisconsin use those drop boxes for the very first time to help relieve some of the pressure at early voting locations and in-person voting locations. And they set them up here in Milwaukee at places like libraries. That was the move that was supported, at least verbally, by the Republican legislature, by the governor, and by election officials. But then you had a conservative institute after the election challenged the existence of those drop boxes, arguing that how they were implemented wasn't in adherence with the law. I want you to listen to that institute, which now has the case before Wisconsin's Supreme Court.
The problem with drop boxes that is presented in the litigation is that drop boxes are not provided for in the law, and they simply aren't. There are two ways to return an absentee ballot. You must either give it in person to the clerk, or you must place it in the United States mail. That's it. There's nothing else. Now, if we want to have drop boxes, then the legislature is going to need to authorize them. And when it does authorize them, what I suspect it would do is adopt a set of rules or directives in order to make sure that the use of drop boxes is relatively uniform.
Based on those challenges, as things currently stand, this February 15th election will be the final election that Wisconsin voters will be able to use those drop boxes unless the Supreme Court steps in and says something different.
So, Shaq, one of the big things here, of course, is that people came to rely on these ballot boxes. They got used to them. It was easier for them, especially during the pandemic, but also just several reasons it made it easier for certain people. Now, you've been speaking with election officials and activists about that. What are you hearing?
More than a third of voters in 2020 voted by mail, and more than half of those voters returned that mail-in ballot using a secure drop box. So I spoke to the commissioner of the Wisconsin, or rather the Milwaukee Election Commission, about this practice, about how many voters have relied on it. Listen to what she told me about this practice.
Our voters really use drop boxes. We saw the increase in absentee voting during the pandemic, where there was a lot of uncertainty with the mail as well. And so voters became accustomed to using the drop box. They get their ballot, they can drop it off at any one of our 15 boxes at libraries, at City Hall. Because of how quickly we process them, and they can check online and have that peace of mind that their vote's been received. It's not going to get destroyed in a machine, lost by a mail carrier. And it's extremely secure. We have 24-hour video surveillance, security seals, lots of checks and balances that a post office box doesn't have.
In Wisconsin, according to the law, those mail-in ballots must be received by the clerk by the close of polls, even if they're in mail processing. So that is part of the reason why people rely on those drop boxes, because they know their vote will be counted once it's in that box.
All right, Shaq, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Now, breaking this morning, former Pope Benedict is speaking out after an independent report by a German law firm commissioned by the Catholic Church criticized his handling of 4 cases of alleged sexual abuse when he was Archbishop of Munich between 1977 and 1982. In a letter, the former Pope said, quote, "I can only express to all the victims of sexual abuse my profound shame, my deep sorrow, and my heartfelt request for your forgiveness." While the former Pope said he is begging for forgiveness for what he described as grievous fault, he did not admit any personal wrongdoing. Let's now take a look at what else is making news around the world this morning.
Ali Arouzi is back with us from Tehran. Ali, good morning.
Good morning, Joe. Good morning, Savannah. 9 people have been killed in the last 3 days in Austria after 100 avalanches struck the country. A combination of heavy snowfall followed by warm weather created perilous conditions. Authorities say the situation is unprecedented. Over the last 3 days, they've launched 70 interventions to help people affected by avalanches. In one incident, 5 skiers were buried under snowfall, but were all miraculously rescued. Spanish refinery giant Repsol says it's almost halfway through cleaning up an oil spill off the Peruvian coast that affected about 50 square miles of land, including around 18,000 square meters of beach, an area of land roughly the size of Paris on Peru's Pacific coast, after almost 12,000 barrels of crude oil were spilled. Marine conservation organizations believe that the response to the spill has been far too slow. And finally, a gun salute of 62 rounds was fired from Tower of London on Monday to mark Queen Elizabeth II becoming the first British monarch to reach a platinum jubilee. As the 70th anniversary of the Queen's ascension to the throne fell on a Sunday, tradition dictates royal salutes should take place the following day. I would have thought they would have fired off 70 rounds, but there you go.
You think so? Or 95. Isn't that how old she is now?
Yeah.
So, yeah, there you go. All right.
Ali, thanks.
Or 95.
Yeah.
Exactly.
All right, coming up, a state of emergency in Canada's capital this morning. That massive truckers' protest over the government's vaccine mandate, it's expanding and intensifying by the day. We're going to take you there.
plus a new form of digital therapy for teens who are struggling with pandemic depression. Mental help through your smartphone. We'll explain next. Welcome back. Warner Brothers is facing a lawsuit over the release of the movie Matrix Resurrections. In a complaint filed in Los Angeles, Village Roadshow Entertainment Group says Warner Brothers' decision to release the film simultaneously on HBO Max and in theaters decimated its box office revenue. The sequel grossed $37 million domestically, which was short of expectations. Now, in a statement responding, Warner Brothers called the lawsuit frivolous and said, quote, "We have no doubt that this case will be resolved in our favor." There have been a series of disputes like this within the movie industry, which relies on those theatrical releases, and media companies looking to grow their streaming platforms. So I think we've said this before, probably not the last one we'll see of these, but we'll see what happens.
I'm intrigued by they picked that one movie, too.
Yeah.
There have been so many. But
yeah,
we'll see
absolutely. There really have been. I mean, I'm so used to now getting to see the movies without going to the theater.
Well, that is coming. We're going to see less of it in 2022,
Yeah.
at least with HBO. So
Yeah.
Thank you, Savannah. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right, a state of emergency is in effect in Ottawa, Canada. That's because of ongoing protests there by truck drivers and their supporters who are upset with a COVID vaccine mandate for truckers crossing the U.S.-Canada border. The movement has virtually shut down the city and is gaining momentum and support from around the world. NBC News correspondent Ellison Barber is there. She joins us from Ottawa with the latest on this. Ellison, good morning. So first of all, a little backdrop. How did we get here, and what are the truck drivers hoping to achieve from these protests?
Hey, Joe. Yeah, this started because truckers were frustrated, some of them, and disagreed with requirements to be vaccinated in order to cross the border. If you look at some of the signs you see here that have been displayed here, you can see that this protest has expanded well beyond that one specific vaccine mandate. Speaking with people here, reading the signs, most people we have spoken to say now this is about lifting any sort of pandemic mandate or restriction. Other people have come and gotten involved in this and sort of called for various political things, but at its core, most of the people we've spoken to, they say that they will stay out here until they see the COVID restrictions, any sort of mandate, be it at a federal level or just more at a local level, lifted. This is day 11 of this protest. We spoke to one trucker this morning who said ultimately he's been at this for about 17 days because it took him days to drive here. He said he's willing to stay for months. Listen.
The whole world's watching us. I mean, Canada's one of the only countries, I think, that could have ever come together and did this and being so united that they could pull this off. Like, you know, you get some bad truckers and some good truckers. These guys are all good. Like, everybody just wants peace. They want to make this good for everybody, right? This is for the nurses and the doctors and the RCMP that have lost their jobs because they won't get vaxxed. We want them to be able to go back to work. We want people to be able to travel. We want the airplane service opened up again.
A lot of people here, when we tried to get them to talk to us, they did not want to talk to us, saying that it was an area that they didn't want to have the media. There have been points during this protest where there have been extremist, racist symbols displayed, from a Confederate flag to swastikas. We haven't seen any of those here today. Mostly it is Canadian flags, signs like these. But you've had many local people, elected officials, condemn that and say that this group has become, in their view, violent, a menace to the community, and they want this entire convoy blockade to end. 80+% of truckers, by the way, are at least partially vaccinated in Canada. According to the Trucking Association here, 80+% of Canadians are fully vaccinated. So you have people like Prime Minister Trudeau saying that this is, in his view, a fringe group of Canadians.
Yeah,
Joe?
I mean, vaccination rates are so high in Canada, at least compared with the U.S. So how is the government reacting to everything that's been taking place?
Yeah, so Prime Minister Justin Trudeau addressed Parliament and spoke specifically about this just last night. He himself had been quarantined because of a positive COVID test last week. He says this has to stop and that the federal government is willing to provide resources to try and take care, if you will, of this situation. Listen to some of what he said.
It has to stop. The people of Ottawa don't deserve to be harassed in their own neighborhoods. They don't deserve to be confronted with the inherent violence of a swastika flying on a street corner. or a Confederate flag, or the insults and jeers just because they're wearing a mask.
So if you look down here, you can see how far this trucker convoy goes, both to the left and the right. The police chief here said he estimates there are probably at least still 1,000 truckers here. There are not enough tow trucks, the city says, to pull any of these out. And again, people we've spoken to, they say they plan to be here as long as it takes. One trucker, when I asked him, when would you end this, he said that's up to the prime minister. Some local residents we've spoken to this morning, they said they want to see some sort of mediator come in to try and get this resolved, because just from a logistical standpoint, it's difficult to travel around the city right now. Joe?
All right, Ellison Barber, thank you so much, Ellison.
Now, we want to warn viewers that this next segment will discuss depression and suicide, and it could be triggering to some. Having struggles with your mental health, as many of us over the last couple years have, can feel extremely isolating. And that's definitely true for many teens tackling depression during the pandemic. But doctors hope a new tool could help them tackle the issue. It's a digital therapeutic aimed at helping teens through their smartphones. Joining us now is Dr. Jessica Lake. She's the Chief Science Officer at Limbix. They're the company behind SparkRx. Hi, Doctor. Good morning. Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate your time. So first off, just explain to our viewers what exactly this is and how does it work?
Yeah, happy to. Thanks, Savannah. So SparkRx is the first evidence-based digital therapeutic. It's a self-guided mobile app designed to treat symptoms of adolescent depression. It's designed with subject matter experts and, importantly, with the input of teens to ensure a clinically effective and engaging program. And what's unique about digital therapeutics is that they are fully treatment programs. They're meant to treat diseases or disorders. And so in that way, they are different from an app that you might regularly download off the App Store. They're held to a higher standard of demonstrating safety and effectiveness. And they are overseen by a healthcare provider, and SparkRx is actually prescription only.
Oh, that's interesting there. Now, like adults, young people have been vulnerable to depression, of course, during the pandemic. I mean, it's been a tough couple years. And last year, actually, this is a disturbing statistic. Suicide attempts, specifically in teen girls, were up more than 50% compared to 2019. What kind of benefit could digital therapy have compared to a more traditional treatment? I mean, I think about how many people have been on long waiting lists to get treatment, and could this impact this in that way so that these numbers couldn't go down?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really the value that we see in digital therapeutics, is it provides immediate access to effective mental health care. You know, we really just see a really global problem right now in a lack of access to specialty care to treat depression, as you spoke to, the long wait list that we see, up to 6 months to see a mental health specialist. And so in contrast to that, you can download an app on your phone right away and have access to effective treatment immediately with a digital therapeutic like Spark.
And now 1 in 5 teens actually will experience depression before adulthood. With these added pressures of the pandemic, do you think we'll see more digital therapeutics used to treat mental health issues so that hopefully that number too can come down?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, really being able to address these issues in the adolescent time period is a way to prevent issues down the road. And really, we're hoping to see a proliferation of these types of apps to treat a number of different mental health disorders, so we can really tackle this problem head on.
Dr. Jessica Lake, we appreciate your time and also what you're doing. Really incredible work, and it's so nice to be able to spotlight this. Now, if you or anyone you know is struggling, please call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 800-273-8255. There it is on your screen, or text TALK to 741-741.
Coming up, some of us know that online dating can sometimes be a pain, right? But has it ever cost you tens of thousands of dollars?
Well, we'll tell you all about the so-called Tinder Swindler and the women who are now looking for payback. That's up next.
Time for our CNBC Money Minute, the biggest financial headlines of the day and why they matter to you.
Bertha Coombs is back with us. Hey, Bertha.
Hey, guys. Facebook parent company Meta is seeing some changes to the board. Peter Thiel, the tech billionaire and former advisor to President Trump, joined the board back in 2005. Now he's stepping down. But he joined a year after the company was founded and 7 years before its IPO. Thiel has been a polarizing figure on the board due to his conservative views. Reports say he wants to shift his focus to influencing November midterm elections. Meantime, Amazon has raised wages for its hourly workers. Now it is increasing the amount of base pay corporate employees can make due to the tight labor market and stiff competition from rivals who sometimes pay more. Corporate and tech employees can now make up to $350,000 a year in base pay, more than double the previous cap. Base pay, though, is just one way Amazon employees get paid. They also generally receive stock and bonuses. Amazon is the nation's second largest private employer behind Walmart. It has 1.6 million full and part-time workers. And the CEO of Take-Two Interactive says the pandemic boom of video games is dead. Speaking on a conference call following the company's earnings last night, he said publishers are coming up short of gamers' expectations. Take-Two makes well-known games like NBA 2K and, of course, Grand Theft Auto. Game makers are reporting and projecting slower growth this year after huge gains during earlier parts of the pandemic. I mean, you know, you couldn't continue at that pace, right? Now that people can actually get out and they have other things to watch besides Tiger King. We've got the Olympics, for example.
Exactly.
You know?
And they get to leave their house. So there's that too.
Not just there as much,
Exactly.
Thank you, Bertha.
Thanks. Now to a story of diamonds, alleged fraud, and online dating.
It's the story of the so-called Tinder Swindler. That's the subject and title of a new Netflix documentary. The filmmakers say Shimon Hayut, also known as Simon Leviv, would pose as a rich diamond heir. He would then allegedly romance and scam women on Tinder, in some cases allegedly out of hundreds of thousands of dollars. That's until some of those women turned the tables on him. According to the Times of Israel, he eventually was arrested and jailed for using a fake passport in 2019, unrelated to the allegations from the women in the film, but he only served 5 months. The Tinder Swindler director, Tinder Swindler director Felicity Morris joins us now. Good morning. Good to have you with us. So tell us, first of all, how did you even hear about this story?
Well, as you'll see in the film, Cecilia, who is one of the victims, she had realized what had been going on. She'd realized that the man that she'd fallen in love with wasn't who he said he was. And she'd gone to the police, but wasn't getting very far with the police, so therefore decided to go public with her story. She wrote to a newspaper in Norway, she's Norwegian, a newspaper called VG, and they started investigating her story and investigating what had happened to her and investigating Simon Leviv. And they published this incredible article, which we and our production partners stumbled across because the story had basically gone viral.
And now, really, we know that ultimately there are these 3 different women from 3 different countries that end up coming together to confront this man, accusing him of taking advantage of them. How did they ultimately discover that they weren't alone and find each other and connect and band together?
Well, what was really incredible about this is that because of the fact that Cecilia had gone to the press, they were then able, the journalists at the heart of the story were then able to find other women that had been mixed up in this con. And so the VG, the Norwegian newspaper journalists, they had gone through Cecilia's American Express records and had seen that a flight for Pernilla, the second woman that we meet in the film, that her flight to Amsterdam to meet Simon had actually been paid for by Cecilia. So the baton was essentially passed from Cecilia to Pernilla at that point. And then Eileen, who is the amazing lady who comes in at the end of the film, she, at the point that this article had sort of gone off, gone viral to the world, she stumbled across it just on her phone. She saw a picture of him on her Instagram and then got in touch with Pernilla, who was front and center of the story at that point, and said, I'm dating him and I feel like I'm living in a horror movie and I don't know what to do.
It's definitely a film-worthy plot right there. So now, according to Variety, Simon last week posted an Instagram story saying he was preparing to tell his version of the story, but his account was later deleted. What is Tinder saying about this? Has the company made any changes?
I haven't heard from Tinder personally. The film, we never wanted it to be the message at the heart of it to be, you know, don't use dating apps, don't meet people online, because I mean, that's how most people meet, you know, the people that they fall in love with these days. But I think, you know, obviously there needs to be a sort of a healthy level of skepticism when you are. But, you know, at the end of the day, the women in the film, they don't blame Tinder. That's not who they feel. They blame Simon. Ultimately, they met Simon online, yes, but actually the real swindle happened when they met him in real life.
Wow.
Felicity Morris, thank you so much. And if our viewers want to check it out, Tinder Swindler is out on Netflix right now. Thanks again.
Thank you. Congrats on the film.
Coming up, it is officially Oscar season.
Yeah, the nominations released just moments ago. We will run through this year's list of contenders and, of course, the snubs. That's next.
The 2022 Oscar nominations were just announced, along with this year's theme, Movie Lovers Unite, which is the perfect year for that because 10 films are nominated for Best Picture.
Yeah, which means we've got a lot of watching to do. Now, unlike many award shows recently, the Oscars are planning for an in-person ceremony on March 27th. Joining us now to recap the nominees is Carolyn Lippo. She's an entertainment editor at Insider. Good morning. Thanks for joining us on this breaking story. So we have to start with Best Picture. We're not going to ask you to list all 10, but give us some of the highlights here.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. It seems like this category was pretty well predicted earlier in the year based on the success at certain precursor awards ceremonies. It seems like Belfast, Kenneth Branagh's deeply personal film about growing up in Belfast, is going to be probably a favorite to win the award this year, as is The Power of the Dog. Don't Look Up, which was, of course, a huge hit for Netflix, starring Leonardo DiCaprio, was also nominated, and that comedy is likely going to have a good shot, just given how popular it was with audiences. And then, of course, we have blockbusters like Dune, which, you know, often don't get the individual acting award, visibility, but they do get appreciation for just being the huge blockbusters and beloved films that they are.
Yeah, sometimes they win those editing or sound categories, and they also get people who maybe haven't watched the other 9 movies to actually watch the Oscars because that's the one they saw.
Yeah,
so
I've seen Don't Look Up.
There you go. You've seen one.
Yeah, I know.
Let's shift to the acting categories. We have a lot of past Oscar winners: Olivia Colman, Denzel Washington, Penelope Cruz, Javier Bardem, Nicole Kidman.
Amazing.
A lot of them, and then some first-timers, some newcomers. Who are the acting favorites this year?
Definitely among the acting favorites, we have a very stacked category for Best Actress. Olivia Colman, as you said, is a past winner for The Favorite, but she gave a phenomenal performance in The Lost Daughter. So it's very likely that she will become a double winner this year. Nicole Kidman also took home a lot of awards love in precursor ceremonies for her role as Lucille Ball and Aaron Sorkin's Being the Ricardos, so she has a very good shot here. Kristen Stewart was pretty much a favorite to win this award earlier in the awards season, but then she was snubbed from a few major awards organizations like the SAG Awards and the BAFTAs, which didn't nominate her at all. But now she's firmly back in the running, and it seems like she possibly took Lady Gaga's place in this category, since Lady Gaga nominated for House of Gucci in a lot of those precursor award ceremonies.
All right, and I've seen Spencer, so there's another one. But you kind of just mentioned this. Let's talk through some snubs. Anything notable here?
Yes, there are quite a few. Lady Gaga, I would say, is the biggest one for House of Gucci. It was a very divisive film among critics and fans. Some loved it, some hated it. But across the board, everyone could appreciate Lady Gaga's very deeply committed method acting and her performance in the role. So that's a pretty major snub. Ruth Negga also was critically acclaimed for her role in Passing, which was pretty much left out of the awards altogether this year. And also in the Best Supporting Actor category, we have a few notable snubs. Bradley Cooper in Licorice Pizza gave a very memorable performance in that film, although he was only in it for just a few minutes. And he seemed like a shoo-in for a nomination for that role, as did Jared Leto, also in House of Gucci.
All right.
Yeah, Jared Leto. My aunt, did you?
He's
say
got one. He
something?
already got an Oscar.
Yeah. I like that movie. I don't know why. I mean, it was a little long, I guess, but I don't know why people didn't like it so much. All right, Carolyn, thank you so much. Great to have you on with us.
That does it for this hour of Morning News Now.
But the news continues right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.